Hello, and welcome to the Legacy Project of the California Court of Appeal. My name is Arthur Gilbert. I'm the presiding justice of Division 6 of the 2nd District of the California Court of Appeal. And it is my pleasure to interview my colleague and dear friend, Justice Stephen Perren. So Justice Perren, you have a long and distinguished career, but let's start at the beginning. You were born in Los Angeles, correct?
That's true. I was born in 1942 at Cedars of Lebanon Hospital, where all good Jewish children were born in the 1940s.
In fact, it was the only place
That's
that was for a kid. And so tell us about your formative years as a youngster.
I grew up on the Fairfax district on Blackburn Avenue off of Fairfax. My father was a 4F during the war, so he worked in the shipyards during the day, and at night he worked in delicatessen, which ultimately became his career. He had been born in New York, and long story short, he was abandoned essentially by his father when he was 3 years old and sent to live with relatives. He had a beautiful voice, and he ended up singing on the streets of New York and with choirs in the city of New York.
Now, this is a quality that you certainly inherited from your father.
I'd like to think so.
Okay, because in addition to your many talents, you're quite a singer. When did you start singing?
I cannot remember not singing. There was a Safeway store on 3rd Street, and my mother would park my little stroller there, and I'd sing outside the store just because that's what I did. And I've sung in, I didn't really become involved in performance singing until I got to UCLA, with one exception, and that was the disaster called the Pajama Game in 1959, when I auditioned for the lead and ended up being a stand-in for a dancer. It was a dark moment in my life, and probably a good one, because I was thinking maybe I should pursue something having to do with music. Well, that disabused me of that notion. And anyway, as you know, as we performed together, I was in bed with Diane, my wife, and there was an advertisement for a cattle call for Guys and Dolls in Thousand Oaks. That was in 1995. And I turned to her, I said, I think I'm going to do that. And she said, are you crazy? I said, yes. So we agreed on that. And I auditioned. And I got in the show in the company at the Cabrillo Music Theater, a regional theater with some professionals involved. I was in the chorus, and the genie was out of the bottle. And I began performing at that point in musical theater. And for the last 25 years or so, I've performed in regional musical theater, community musical theater, Gilbert and Sullivan Repertoire Company, and with Santa Barbara Opera in their company up in Santa Barbara that performs professional opera with community chorus background.
Well, we certainly all know about that. You even sung, I'm going to back up in a few minutes and go back to your education, but as long as we're on music, you sang in Disney Hall with the LA Lawyers Philharmonic.
I did, and you were responsible in large part for that, because through you, Gary Green had heard that I had a voice.
Now, Gary Green
is the conductor for the Los Angeles Lawyers Philharmonic and Chorus, known as Legal Voices. And about 7 years ago, I get a call from Gary, principally because of what you had discussed with him. He was thinking of forming this chorus, and he wanted me to sing a solo with your orchestra, which I did. It went very well. And shortly thereafter, the chorus was formed. I guess he was liberated with the idea of having a chorus. And I was with that chorus for a number of years, but the 120-mile round-trip drive every Monday night just kind of wore me out, and I haven't done it for a couple of years. But to stand in Disney Hall, I sang Bring 'Em Home from Les Mis, backed by a harp at Disney Hall in a full orchestra. And if there is a heaven, that's where I was at that moment.
Well, I certainly can attest to that. Now, I recall you singing Summertime.
Not Summertime.
No,
it was Porgy and Bess, and
Porgy and Bess. What was the tune again?
A Woman is a Sometime Thing.
Well, you sang that as a soloist, and you brought the house down. I was there. I saw it. I was just overwhelmed, and your stage presence, you just mesmerized the entire audience.
Well,
that
you're
was
kind.
Quite an experience,
Now,
wasn't it?
For the benefit of those who may have lost their way and gotten this video by accident, they ought to understand, and I say this reverentially actually, that Arthur Gilbert is a real artist. He's a trained, highly trained musician, and so when he, as my good friend and colleague, looks at me and says, "I did something good," that's the real compliment.
Well, thank you. But I'm going to back up a little bit, talk about your education,
yeah.
and we'll talk about music as well when you feel you'd like to interject something. And maybe I was just going to suggest maybe you could give us a rendition now. But so all right. So now you're in Los Angeles. You're going to school.
Yes.
You're singing.
Yes.
And it's just because it's something in the family, right?
Well, Dad was the singer.
Yeah.
He, as I mentioned, he was in New York. He sang with the great cantors of New York. There's a name that some people will recognize of Yosela Rosenblatt, who in the 1920s was as big a star in the Broadway area as the Broadway stars were with the Yiddish American theater and with the heavy Jewish population attending synagogues. He sang with him, he sang with others, and he even sang with Jan Pierce, who sang with the Metropolitan Opera.
Boy.
And so he had a beautiful voice, just a clear, bell-clear tenor that was wonderful.
How would you characterize your voice?
I characterize, my vocal coach tells me I'm what's known as a Helgen tenor, which is a Wagnerian tenor. I don't sound like a tenor. My voice is too full and too heavy for a tenor. It's what Wagnerian tenors sing in a more a fuller voice.
So you when you sing, you project.
It's been said.
You've had a few experiences with that voice of yours. Can you just give us a couple of examples?
Such as?
When you were singing in the Hollywood Bowl, for example, and you did a recording once, and
they had spring sing at UCLA, where I went to school, and after I had left my fraternity, I was in my first year of law school, and I was singing with several friends in a group called the 10 of Them, 5 women, 5 men, and we were doing a Peter, Paul, and Mary piece. It doesn't come to mind at this moment, but there were 3 solos in it, and the sound technician in the Hollywood Bowl during the sound check wanted to get our levels. So he had the 3 of us coming forward, and the first person came forward and sang her piece, and the sound technician said, "Could you step a little closer to the microphone?" She did and sang lovely. A second was a baritone by the name of Bill Kerr. I remember very well, a very close friend. He went forward, he sang, and they said, "Could you step a little closer to the microphone?" I came forward and sang my moment, and the soundman said, "Stop, could you step a little back from the microphone?" So the groundwork was laid there. I did musical theater at UCLA in the musical comedy workshop when everybody was studying law and I was in law school. They were going to their jobs because their careers were before them. I was going in the Army. So I went with the musical comedy workshop at UCLA for 2 years, and we put on a production written by John Rubinstein called The Short and Turbulent Reign of Roger Ginsburg.
Wow.
John is
the son of the pianist Arthur Rubinstein.
That's correct.
Right.
And an Emmy Award-winning, a Tony Award-winning actor for Pippin.
Yeah.
And there was a sound experience with that. We recorded it. Arthur Rubinstein paid for a recording at the RCA Studios in Hollywood. and we were all in our different places, as they did in those days, and we all had our individual mics, and we were wired into the soundboard, and everybody was getting sound tested, and I knew I'd sung perhaps a little too fully when the sound tech's eyes went straight up and he started adjusting the dials rapidly down, which was visible to me. So yeah, a lesson I've learned is sometimes less is more.
Okay. So now I want to back up a little bit, just briefly go over your early education and how you eventually came to law school. So you went to, now you moved to the Valley, right? You lived in Los Angeles near Fairfax Avenue.
Right. What happened was my mom and dad, B and Sam, came out in 1937. They'd been married a little over a year. Mom was born in West Virginia, Dad in New York. They were 4 years apart in age. They rode out. It was the Depression. My dad couldn't get a job because he was a tailor and his father wouldn't hire him. So he called my grandfather, Harry, who lived in West Virginia, which is where my mother's from. And I still have the letter. And because my grandfather had remarried and my mother was none too fond of the woman he had married, my father sent my grandfather a letter asking if he could get employment. I saw the letter replying, which was a beautiful letter written by a man who could barely speak English because of his broken Russian accent, but he was very eloquent in the pen. And he said, "Dear Sam, we love you very much, but the way B feels, perhaps if you need a stopover as you're looking for work, you can stop in Princeton, but I don't think your future is here." It was almost poetic.
Yeah.
Dad and Mom went instead with a couple of other relatives and drove across country from New York to Los Angeles. There was some family, I think, on both sides in Los Angeles, and all in the Wilshire, Fairfax area, which was a very, very large Jewish enclave in those days. In fact, remains the last one in Los Angeles today.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so I went to Hancock Park Elementary School, and in 1951, at the brilliant age of 9, and my brother now 3, we moved to the San Fernando Valley, which was to the Jewish community at that time much the same as Moses leading them out of Egypt into the San Fernando Valley, all leaving a prosperous area and heading to the desert. It was, Dad bought a home. My dad, that was everything for him was his family.
Yeah.
He had a half-sibling, but he had no family life growing up, and for him, everything was about his wife, who he adored, and his 2 children. So he bought a house, $15,000 on Bel Air Avenue in North Hollywood, and we lived there until 1978 when they moved, so I was 51 to 78. I went to Hancock Park Elementary School when I lived in LA, went to Monlux Elementary School, which was immediately across the street. You walked out the front door of my house and into the gate of Monlux Elementary School, a gate my mother often walked through when the teachers would call and say, "B, he's at it again." And she came to school every semester from the day I entered elementary school until I left junior high school.
Okay, now what kind of, so you were somewhat of a troublemaker? Not really.
I talked too much.
Oh, welcome to the club. No wonder we're such good friends.
And I was agitated because, as education was,
Yeah.
it was tried to see the golden mean.
Yeah.
And retrospectively, it appears to me that I probably had ADD, and I'd move around and I'd talk, and I did all the things. The teachers actually liked me. I just drove them nuts.
I don't know anyone who doesn't like you, so that has carried over throughout the years.
And I drive them nuts too.
Yeah, but it's in a very good way.
So I was at that elementary school, and then I went to Van Nuys Junior High, and it was a massive explosion of population in the valley in those years. And they were building schools about as rapidly as you could. So I went from Van Nuys, then they transferred me to Fulton with a coterie of people who were ultimately destined to start the junior high school called Madison. Went there and then off to North Hollywood High, where I played football.
You played football. You were football. No, that's why you're always educating me on plays, and you see all the subtleties that I miss. So you've
So did I when I was playing football. That's why I didn't do very well.
What position did you play?
I was a bad halfback.
A bad halfback.
The halfback really was a true statement in my case instead of a fullback. I was.
Now,
my lack of strength was. I'm sorry.
Do they still use the term halfback? Or?
No.
What's a halfback today?
A running back. They had one
back.
running back and a blocking back who used to be called the fullback, and the quarterback, and a whole range of formations. But so I played 2 years, 1 year B and 1 year of varsity football. My big game was against Grant High School, where I gained 99 yards and a touchdown on a 60-yard run.
So what? That's not so bad.
No, it wasn't. They didn't have any seniors on their team either. So they had just opened Grant, where I would have gone to school.
Yeah.
But
you never forget that, do you?
Oh, I don't.
That must be. You must have been some hero doing that.
No, I was second string whenever the bench needed clearing. I ran track slowly, so I didn't do very well there either. But I loved sport, and graduated from North Hollywood High and went immediately to. I was a January graduate, went immediately into UCLA, which I just applied to on a lark.
Well, I mean, you knew you were going to go to college.
Oh, that was never an issue.
At that early time of your career, were you thinking about a profession or what you were going to do? I mean, here you have music, you love being in theater and so on. What were your thoughts at that time?
Well, as we discussed once upon a time, kids labor over what's my career, where's my future, what do I want to be? That was never an issue in my life or in my family. I cannot remember a time that my mother and father both agreed that I knew I was going to be a lawyer. So I guess I knew it because that's what happened. I had an absolutely straight line from the day I breathed my first until I graduated law school. That's where I was headed, that's what I was going to do, and that was it.
It sounds to me like this wasn't just pressure from your family, but that there was something inside you that said you wanted to go into law.
Yes, there was. In fact, one of the things that stirred me, I just remembered this. My dad knew I wanted to go into law in the summer of 1961. I went to work in a pillow factory for summer work. The Purified Down Corporation in Burbank. I was in the foam rubber department. You had to be there to really appreciate it. And it was a big producer of pillows. And the fellow who owned it was a guy by the name of Jack Puro, was a close friend of my father's. And I worked there for a summer. It was an interesting place to work. It was something out of the 50s. It was, Life of Riley, whatever. Working folks, doing that kind of work that probably isn't performed anymore.
For viewers who won't know what Life of Riley is, that was a quite popular television show.
It was.
About a working class stiff guy, a nice guy who took care of his family and would get into all kinds of situations and so on. I'm trying to remember the actor's name. It's almost
William Bendix.
William Bendix. My goodness! Wow.
Yeah. So I'm working at this pillow factory, and I worked there. I worked for $1.25 an hour. My take-home pay per week was $39.37.
Big money in those days.
Big money. And you were on a time clock. You came late, they docked you. If you left late, they didn't pay you the extra. And I remember Jack. I knew him. And on my last day there, I'm walking out, the wisdom from the gods. Jack stops me at the door, says, "So Steve, what did you learn?" And I said, "Well, I understand this machine for K-POC and how you package and the routing that you did with your boxes. You have 50, 100 people working here and how you prepare." He said, "Steve, what did you learn?" I said, "I never want to work in a place like this again." And he said, okay, it worked, and he sent me on my way.
That's what he wanted to hear,
That's
right?
what he wanted
now,
to hear.
Speaking of working, your father opened a delicatessen.
He did.
And tell us a little bit about that. And you and your brother worked there.
We did.
So tell us a little bit about that.
The background on that is my dad's father, the one from whom he was alienated, was a tailor in New York during the Depression. My dad reconciled a bit with him after he graduated high school and hoped to be able to go to CCNY, and my grandfather said, no, you're going to go to work as a tailor, which my father did. Anyway, he met my mom. They came out to California, and he started working in 1937-38 in the delicatessens in Los Angeles. He worked at Billy's in Glendale, Nate and Al's, Cantor's in Boyle Heights.
All the famous
delis. And he learned his trade. I remember we used to drive from the Valley to Boyle Heights in a 1948 Chevy, and they used to have the platforms in the back. I don't know what you call them, but behind your seat there was your headrest, and there was just this flat platform, I guess, over the trunk. And I'd lay up in that platform area. My brother would be there. Mom would drive Dad down to Cantor's in Boyle Heights. We only had one car. And then she'd go pick him up, and we were in the car back and forth. He then went from that, which was about 49, ultimately went to Billy's in Glendale, and then he opened his own delicatessen. This was a really heroic act. This is a man who never owned his business. He was an icon to me. He just would not be beaten. He worked hard. He was just a straight-up honest guy, except for one minor deviation. I forgot this. He had a delicatessen with a fellow named Leo Haas down on Pico Boulevard in Los Angeles. And then he left Leo, and they formed a place. I think he called it Sam's or something like Tasty Delicatessen. That was the name of it. He got closed down by the LAPD in 1948 or 49, and the reason, there was gambling going on upstairs over which he had no control. The mob came in, the LA mob came in, including Bugsy Siegel, and told my father, we're going to have a poker game up here. So they had a poker game up there. What was he to do? And he got closed down for that. There's a certain justice theme in there that resonates with me as I look back on it. Anyway, Dad had finally opened his own delicatessen in Burbank in 1954.
And the name of it is?
Perren's.
Perren's.
There you go. And he was there from 54 to 1976. Mom worked the counter. Dad was at the sandwich board. We had a couple of waitresses. He expanded the place to, I think at the maximum, it had a 6-seat counter and 4 booths and about a half a dozen tables. That put 2 kids through college. You know, made a life for him. It was what I learned America was.
Well, I was just going to say that, not as a political statement,
no,
but only in America.
Yeah, that's just the way it was. He did it by hard work.
So many of us, our parents came from such humble backgrounds.
Yeah.
And the opportunities in this country are just beyond belief.
And that first generation, Dad was a first generation American, they knew and accepted the fact that they might not be all the things that they would want to be, but they'd be damn sure their kids could be.
Yeah.
And that's a lesson I took from that, never forgot.
And, well, your work ethic certainly shows that. What kind of work did you do in the delicatessen as a kid?
Well, depends on who you talk to.
I'm talking to you.
Well, according to my mother, not much. My brother was very good. He was 6 years my junior, and in fact, my father had a heart attack in about 1965 when I was in law school, and my brother, who was a senior in high school, ran the delicatessen with my mother as my dad recovered.
Wow.
So my brother was fully engaged in that, as well as going to Northridge, where he ultimately became an accountant. I would work the counter, slice meat, slice cheese,
Did you ever sing for the customers?
No.
Okay.
It was not that kind of delicatessen.
Okay.
And I didn't really have any appreciation for my own voice, such as it may be.
Yeah.
We worked, and the delicatessen, the bonus, to the extent my dad ever got a bonus, was every Christmas in Burbank, the stores would have Christmas parties, and my father would make platters for the Christmas parties. And I would work with him, as would my brother, through the night until dawn, and we'd carry the platters all around Burbank. They've been pre-ordered.
So this is the irony of a Jewish delicatessen doing quite well at Christmas time.
We depended upon it. It reminds me, they have a furniture mart in Los Angeles, but they had people who only were allowed in there that did business with their permission.
Yes, I knew it quite well. The
So
traffic
Dad,
court was right near it when I was sitting
There
there
you know.
45 years ago.
well, Dad had 6 or 7 contacts there, and he would deliver sandwiches to them through the back door. And I remember riding down there and delivering sandwiches.
Wow.
Making a living was what you could do. It was cash on hand, and it was the 50s. It was wonderful. It was wonderful.
So now you're at UCLA.
Yeah.
And what are you studying now? You want to go into law at that point.
Right.
So that you're sort of thinking of your future. What did you major in? What were your interests at UCLA?
My major was to get to law school. So that really, I
I'm
just
majoring in how do I get to law school?
That's what can I do that
Yeah.
I enjoy for 4 years to get my degree and to get to law school. So I majored in history, and that was a good choice. And my daughter now is a professor at the University of Texas, and I say that because she's in what you would call a soft subject, the communications, film, radio, and television, where she's an associate professor. And those are topics that, it's not a STEM class, so who cares? But back when you and I went to school, old guys that we are, people thought that education meant education on the
liberal arts or the sciences.
Right.
Right.
And the most influential teacher I had as an undergraduate was a fellow by the name of, I just went brain dead, I'll remember it, William.
Oh yes, he was a history professor.
He was my history professor.
Hitchcock. That's right. He was famous when I was there, and I was there before you. And go ahead. Yes.
He was, I knew nothing about this. When I went to UCLA, I was really not very well schooled in literature. I wasn't schooled in literature. History, American history, okay, but the world was yet to open up. And then I had Hitchcock's class. And I remember one class was Haynes Hall 39, for those who were familiar with.
I used to sit in that lecture hall. Oh my
Big
goodness.
lecture hall. And Hitchcock was giving a lecture on tragedy and the Greek tragedians, moving to Shakespeare, and ultimately to Pygmalion, come on, who wrote
George Bernard Shaw.
George Bernard Shaw. And he was giving a lecture on tragedy, trying to get across the notion that without values being compromised, without passions being aroused, and without values of the highest order that you could lose, there could be no tragedy. There had to be something of worth that ultimately was either lost, compromised, or for which you died. Otherwise, there was no tragedy. It was life, period. And he gave a recital, I don't know what else, soliloquies from Shakespeare. I think it was Julius Caesar, and Shaw also, who he considered to be the last tragedian because the values of the world had changed so much that tragedy was almost impossible.
Sean's Pygmalion?
It was Pygmalion. Yeah. It was, oh God, the importance of being earnest. No, he wasn't. Well, oh God, I apologize to all you English majors. That was wrong.
No, yes.
But Shaw, when he gave these soliloquies, and he just gave the class, playing all the parts. There was silence in the class, 250 people. And he finally finished something from Shakespeare, if I recall. And he had a high-pitched, non-dramatic voice. He was not a dramatic person. You could hear a pin drop. And when he finished, the students, all lower division history majors, went nuts. I mean, they literally were stamping their feet, applauding, and I thought, there's something going on here I've got to know about. And so I studied history for the 4 years, and the last class I remember...
let me just interrupt you for a minute.
Yeah.
It seems to me, if I can just make this comment, that passion to pursue an ideal certainly informs all your work as a judge throughout your career.
I'd like to think so. And
I know so.
And
I'd
say so for you too.
I've been a colleague of yours and seen you and know the kind of work you do, and we're going to get into that shortly. But I can see that influence had a profound effect on how you act as a justice on the Court of Appeal and as a judge before that in the trial court.
Well, I had a class with a guy named Rappaport, who was a political science teacher.
I remember him too. Oh my goodness, you're bringing back memories.
And we had a class on the history of the state, the concept of stateness, from the Greeks to current times. And we read Aristotle, and we read Plato, and ultimately I read William Golding's Lord of the Flies.
Yeah.
And we had to do a term paper. And so what I wrote as a term paper was, I took the protagonist in Lord of the Flies after he's rescued on the Navy boat that rescues him. And while he's in one of the rooms, now having been rescued, Aristotle appears. And they had a dialogue. Where did you screw up on that city-state you tried to form that failed so miserably? And so I wrote a 10 or 15 page dialogue between Aristotle and that kid.
How interesting. Wow.
And I thought, I'm dead meat. You know, I don't do this stuff, but teacher liked it.
Let me ask, do you still have that paper?
I wish I could find it.
Oh, because I'd love to read it.
Me too.
My goodness, wow.
So I graduated UCLA in '64 and had 6 months off. Now, I was in ROTC. The Vietnam War was heating up. I went advanced course of ROTC in order to get a commission because I knew I was going in. The draft was inevitable, certainly in my case. And because I was healthy, I was the right age, you got drafted. So I decided to go in the Army, the advanced course, and I got my commission as a second lieutenant in the Army upon graduation. But I wanted to go to law school. So I prevailed upon the Army to defer me for 3 years, which in retrospect was the right choice, but at that time I really thought it was the right choice. The real difference was the Vietnam War heated up. If I'd have gone in, I'd gone in for 6 months and come out and probably not seen active duty for a long period of time, and probably not have gone overseas. Well, I deferred for 3 years, went to law school, and went immediately in the Army after I graduated. Well, in that 6-month hiatus between college and law school, I worked in the traffic department of the city of Los Angeles as a traffic signal scheduler. And I learned another valuable lesson. The first thing they did for me was they sent me in the field to do what I was going to then tell others to do in scheduling the installation and maintenance of traffic signals about which I knew nothing. And so I went in the field, and I worked in the field digging trenches, and then I went back, and I knew when I made these orders what these people would have to do. So by dint of my intellect and my planning and my raw knowledge of what was going on, I scheduled the complete repair of the Wilshire Corridor during Christmas. Well, the Chamber of Commerce was not pleased. Because they would tear up the streets during Christmas, and they're laying all these.
Right.
My boss, Sam Taylor, called me and said, "I think we're going to reschedule that." So, lesson learned. Take a little further look about things. So, I worked there for 6 months, and I entered law school. I also taught speed reading during that time.
Oh, the Evelyn Wood speed reading
this
course?
There was a.
Oh, there was another one.
There was another one.
I recall that. Well, Evelyn Wood was a little later.
In '63, I taught that, and my dear friend Bill Patterson, who was the reason I came to Ventura, we'll get to that in a bit, was my mentor. He worked for the same group. He taught me how to teach speed reading. I went on a road with these tachistoscopes. They were just bars that forced your eyes down the...
I took... Incidentally, do you still use that technique in your work?
No. In fact, what I learned was by going to law school, you learn slow reading.
Yeah. Okay, because if you did that, I was going to ask you to teach me. So we get out of a course.
I'm a very slow reader. Anyway, I did that. Law school, I started. And my life was irrevocably changed. I came in contact with people who spoke a language I knew I was going to love but didn't understand. And I was amongst people who did understand it. My friends to this day, some very bright friends, they were picking up on things that were just going by me. It took me a while to adapt, both intellectually and in presentationally, in how to write. And I never really had a good foundation in grammar or writing. And I got through college and essays, and then came law school, so I'm finally ready to write. Well, that's not law school writing. I didn't do particularly well the first year because I couldn't write. I couldn't write smart. I couldn't write issues. I wanted to write essays on the reasons for stuff as if it were a history exam. So I came out about the middle of the class. Next year I did very well, but I encountered somebody who just was a beacon for where I wanted to go, and that was Murray Schwartz.
He was the dean.
He became the dean.
Became the dean.
He was my criminal law professor. Yeah. And he set the standard for me. I knew I wanted to be a criminal lawyer. I listened to the things he said and saw what the criminal law dealt with, where it really was Sisyphus pushing the stone up the hill. It was one person. You may not win, but you fought the good fight. And you read the cases, and it just illuminated to me the nature of the structure of our society. I didn't realize it, the degree to which that was so, until much later. I ran into Professor Schwartz when I was at a UCLA game in the press box after I had become a judge, and long story how I ended up in the press box, and who's sitting next to me but Murray Schwartz. Well, he was never going to be Murray Schwartz. He was Professor Schwartz then and after and before, whatever. Could never call him Murray. He was Professor Schwartz, revered the man, and I think he was the most influential person I have had in my life in the law.
Were you able to tell him that at the meeting you had, or what?
I sent him a letter.
Did you talk to him when you were sitting next to him?
Oh yeah, we talked. We chatted up football.
Good. Okay.
Yeah. But he was wonderful, and we had professors who were prosaic. We had professors who were stellar. we had a wonderful time. I made friends that are friends to this day. The law school experience for me was all-consuming, as was downtown Westwood, where we went after classes to the BA, which was a bowling alley, actually had a bar upstairs, and
the VD, the
Village Delicatessen.
Village Delicatessen. Yeah. Speaking of delicatessens, my gosh.
And my life became all things in Westwood, except I still lived at home.
Okay, yeah.
And
home was in the valley.
In the valley. So I commuted with a classmate of mine, two classmates of mine, Dick Weisbart, who went on to Berkeley, but I did commute, didn't have a car, never owned a car. So I borrowed my family car. I don't know what I did. I got to the...
You got to school somehow.
I got to school. And we had parking down at... you couldn't park very long in the neighborhoods. They had 1 hour limits.
Right, I remember that too.
So we had a schedule of car movers.
Yeah.
We'd all leave our keys on the tires of the car. And this group, we would all agree where we would park initially, and then whoever's day it was to move the cars would run down and move all the cars to different locations because they chalk the tires. And so I don't know if this means anything even today.
You were enterprising law students.
We were surviving.
So now, so you're in law school, and the Army intervenes, does it not?
Well, it didn't intervene just then. I was deferred.
Okay, you were deferred.
So I went through law school for 3 years. And then...
Is that the time you met your wife, Diane?
We met in 1961. Diane and I met in Spring Sing, 61, when she was in a sorority, and I was conducting the sorority fraternity AE Phi Pi Lambda Phi chorus.
So people understand. Tell us, Spring Sing was a UCLA...
Remains a UCLA
Yeah, it's still there, right?
Yeah, and the performances were at the Hollywood Bowl. They no longer are.
Yeah.
And I performed there with this chorus.
So what is it? It's like fraternity houses and sororities
and
have musicals.
Dorm groups. And, anybody who put together a group, you could audition.
They could perform.
And they had different classes, different groups and competitions. Met Diane then. We dated for 4 years and stopped dating right before I went to law school. And the circumstances were such that she really wasn't terribly fond of me at that point. And so it was not a pleasant breakup. And she told me not really to call. Well, I wasn't a very obedient servant, and then we kind of rekindled our flame in law school. She'd hang out with us, and she knew my classmates, and she had friends, and she was a senior at UCLA at the time.
So she saw the light, finally.
No, she lost the light because that summer, after my first year of law school, all my buddies are looking for jobs. Well, again, I'd saved some money when I worked in the city, so what the hell? And so Diane and I had agreed to fly to Europe on a charter that UCLA students had put together on Saturn Airlines. If you've never heard of it, consider yourself blessed. And we flew to Europe and hitchhiked through Europe for 2 and a half.
Wait a minute. So she was pretty enamored of you.
We had a great relationship.
She's hitchhiking through Europe with you.
Yeah, we sort of healed our wounds.
I guess so.
And after that, things got rocky, and she just told me it just isn't working, and let's call it. And I would call her periodically. She was a social worker down at Children's Hospital in Los Angeles. She was bilingual. She was terrific. I'd call her, she'd hang up. I'd call her, she'd hang up. That went on for 2 years. I finally called her when I was a senior in law school in the spring of 1967. And as she says, you again, basically, I said, don't hang up. And she says, why? And I said, look, I'm going in the Army. I'm graduating law school. I'd like to get back together with you. And she said, I'm not going to go on a date with you. but I will meet you someplace. Well, I said, I'm a bartender at the El Toril in Westwood. She says, fine, you stay on your side of the bar, I'll stay on my side. She ate my dinner, which was my pay for working, part of my pay. We started dating, and it got very intense. And then one day she walks into the law school. And all my friends knew her, and were very fond of her. And she walks in, and she says, okay. Now, by this time, I'm standing in the hallway of the UCLA Law School. The marble walls are there, and all my friends aren't. They scattered to the winds, for they were more perceptive than I. She walks up to me in the foyer, and she says, look, either we get married, or I'm just going out the door. This is now 6 years after we started dating. Traveled to Europe, broke up. Yeah, typical story. And she looks me square in the eye and says, either we get married or I'm going out the door. And I said to her, let's not rush into anything. My wife, Diane, looked at me as if to say, you really are that stupid.
Yeah.
She turns on her heels and starts to walk to the door. And then one of those moments right out of the movies, I said, wait. And she turns and she says romantically, what? And I said, romantically, okay, we'll get married. And she said, as the strings swelled, fine, I'll get back to you. And walks out the door. She did, and we got married a month later.
So, and then you traveled through Europe.
No, that was 2 years before we traveled.
Oh, that was, of course, right.
And then we traveled across country.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm coming out of the law school. Everybody's going off to this job and that job, and I'm going in. The notice from the Army said you're sent to a short-duty military zone or something like that. Well, everybody knew what that was. I was put in the Signal Corps, and I went over, and anyway, long story short, we drove across country to Georgia. I got out of the basic signal school, and I taught military justice. They had just passed the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and all to reform what had become a somewhat archaic statute. And it came back again when I got to Vietnam because I had to teach it in Vietnam. And so anyway, I went to the signal school. We drove across country again when I was sent over to the unit I was going overseas with. Brought Diane back to LA. We drove down. And as we went through Ventura, I remember seeing the courthouse at Ventura, which then was a real courthouse in 1967.
When you say then was a real courthouse.
Today it's the City Hall.
It's the City Hall today.
I said, Bill Patterson works there. I'm going to go see him. So we
now,
went
he
over.
was a buddy of yours in law school.
He was my good friend
earlier.
in law school. He was the smart one and remains so. And I went to visit him, and George Eskin, who also had gone to UCLA, became Bert Pine's assistant city attorney, was the assistant district attorney in Ventura, was the assistant district attorney in Santa Barbara, became a judge.
And also was an assistant to the city attorney here.
Yes.
As well. And he became a judge. He's retired now.
That's true.
And sitting by assignment at various times.
And his wife is a state senator.
And that's
Hannah Beth Jackson.
Hannah Beth Jackson.
So I go in to say hello to Bill, and Bill says, what are you going to do when you get out of the Army? And, you know, again, my foresight was, I don't know. So he introduces me to George, who remembered me passingly from law school. He says, well, keep in touch. So I did. Overseas I went. And I spent a time in Washington, as I say, was at Augusta, Georgia, Tacoma, Washington, and then I shipped out to Long Binh, Vietnam, where I served 10.5 months. Over there, I had, as an adjunct to my ordinary duties, was military justice. I defended and prosecuted cases. Was my commander's convening authority for non-judicial punishment. I was located right there what was known as Long Binh Jail, or affectionately known as LBJ, where the prisoners were kept. And I ended up defending dope cases, and I prosecuted a black market case. And the word got out because the defendants were entitled to a lawyer to represent them under that military code that I had just been involved in when I was teaching it in the Southeastern Signal School. So they flew me all over the southern half of Vietnam teaching military justice, and they flew me around to defend people. I defended a case just off the Mekong Delta, prosecuted rather, it was the NCO Mafia, as it came to be known, was just diverting liquor and alcohol to NCO clubs and making a fortune. And I prosecuted one of those cases, and I defended some dope cases out at another place on a rubber plantation in the South China Sea. Anyway, that was my introduction to law in a very vibrant way, when after winning 2 cases, the commanding officer at the base, I had won 2 cases and gotten 2 guys off on marijuana charges, called me into his office. I was in the middle of nowhere. And it was a Thai base camp with American spotter planes. And the commanding officer, a colonel, looks at me and says, "Captain Perren, you did a fine job representing these guys, but here's the deal. Discipline is very important in my unit, and what you've done has disrupted that. So you got 10 minutes to get your ass out of here, or I'm going to have you shot."
Boy, oh boy. Wow.
Now, I'm not so sure.
I remember that story, you telling me that.
I'm not so sure he was going to do that, but I didn't test it.
You got that. You got out of there.
I got out of there. I did my tour in Vietnam. It was an interesting experience, and I learned representing guys in helpless situations and in hopeless situations. I mean, where are they going to turn? They're in the middle of a war zone. They needed someone, a lawyer, to help them. I helped them administratively. I helped them defending them. I prosecuted a case. Had a wonderful experience. It's almost embarrassing to tell you. But it was fascinating. Came back to the United States with Diane. Met Diane at the airport. There I am, married. I have a car, a wife. I have a wife. She has a husband. Perfect parity. And what are we going to do? So my father-in-law says, "Why don't you go up to something called Santa Clara County,
or Santa Clara,
and San Jose. I understand there's some industries getting developed up there. Maybe they'll need lawyers." There was no Silicon Valley at that time. So Diane and I had no prospects, 0. Get in the car, and we start driving north. And I said, "Let's stop off and see if there's a job available here in the DA's office in Ventura." I'd been in touch with George. So we pull into the cop place. I walk in the office in Levi's and a T-shirt. I said hello to George. 4 deputies had left the DA's office, and in those days, they literally threw you out of that office after no more than 3 years because it was not a career. Woody Deem, the DA, wanted people who were going to be in, vigorous, and then get out and make a living. So I was hired by George on the spot because 4 deputies had left. He said, "Can I go to work tomorrow?" I said, "Could I at least have the weekend to find a place to live?" And that was the start of it. And I spent 2.5 years in the DA's office. Went to work with a PI defense firm for 4.5 years. Left that firm, Benton Ordeval in Buckingham, and went to work with Alan Gitterman and Gitterman, Schweitzer, and Herreras was the name of it.
Right. So you were doing prosecutorial work.
Yeah.
You were doing insurance defense, and you were doing plaintiff's work. You were on both sides.
Right.
You got quite an experience in the trial level on both sides of the counsel table, so to speak.
Yeah. And unbeknownst to me, that's what I needed to do. I didn't do it because that's what I needed to do. I just did it. In the process, I'm one of those liberal guys, and I got called by the ACLU to represent a guy in a strawberry strike who'd been arrested by the police for assault on a police officer. There were photographs of him on the front page of the Ventura Star-Free Press, our local paper, showing my client with a picket sign about to hit a police officer over the head. Well, that isn't what happened, actually. I got called to represent that guy. I couldn't believe it. What the heck can I do? They got it in a photograph. But I went down to NBC News, and they gave me a motion picture film of exactly what happened. They said, well, we'll give it to you, but we need a subpoena. So I wrote a subpoena, something called subpoena, and I signed it and gave it to the guy. Said, fine, here's your film. And it showed that my guy wasn't attacking the police officer. As he was poised this way, appearing to strike, he was actually discarding the sign as he was coming forward to try and pull the police officer off his wife, who had been slammed down on the hood of a car. The DA called NBC News about 10 minutes after I had. Shortly thereafter, a couple of friends of mine from the DA's office walked in and said, I understand you got some motion picture film. I said, yeah. Can we see it? I said, yep. Showed it to him. He pled to a disturbing of the peace, end the case. And I did some other work for the farm workers and whatever. And that amalgam of experience, I tried cases, just done the things that you've described, acquitted me well in the eyes of Jerry Brown.
And your colleagues and everyone else. I mean, it was really quite an interesting career.
It was.
So Jerry Brown, now that's a familiar name.
You think?
Now this was, Jerry Brown was running, this was his first...
This was the end of his first term.
Okay, the end of his first term.
You'd just been appointed to the Court of Appeal a year before.
That's right. I was appointed at the beginning of his first term. So, and you're now appointed at the end of his first term.
I'm at the end of his second term.
Of second? No.
Yeah. Duke Majan came in right after that.
No, well, wait a minute. I'm talking about you being appointed to the Superior Court.
Superior Court, right.
When was that?
That was December 1982.
Oh, my goodness. That's right.
And you were appointed.
We've been together so long, I'm thinking back to the first iteration of Jerry Brown's.
Well, you'd been appointed. This was the first iteration of Jerry Brown.
Yeah.
This was his second term of his first iteration.
Got it. That's right.
And so we had known each other, you and I. So I got appointed, but everybody was terrified that George Duke Majan, Jerry appointed, must have been 50 judges all over the state. We were all terrified.
Now, this is just at the end of his term.
End of his term, the last day.
The last day, there was this massive...
he called you the last day.
Yes, yeah, I understand.
And they organized a Secretary of State office in 4 different places: San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Fresno. And like soldiers going off to battle, we went into the recruitment station and went through a series of stations where we signed the documents, Secretary of State signed the commission, we were sworn in by a judge from the Superior Court, and that was on a Sunday. Monday was a holiday, and Tuesday I was a judge.
Now, in those days, when you were appointed, they had a municipal court?
They
then?
certainly did, and
that's a court that doesn't exist anymore. When there was the consolidation.
That's correct.
And what was your first assignment?
My first assignment was in general trials in the Ventura County Superior Court. There had been four new Superior Court judges appointed: Mindy Johnson, me, Alan Steele, Jim McNally.
Now, you were appointed not to the municipal court, but to the Superior Court.
Right. And I remember the phone call. Governor Brown got on, and I never met the man. I never anything the man. He says, Steve says, yeah, I'm going to appoint you. We're going to put you on the Superior Court. Is that okay? We didn't argue much. And he said, well, good luck. And the line was, keep the faith. And then I talked to the appointment secretary, and all the arrangements were made. And so on a Friday, I'm a guy waiting at a telephone, and on a Tuesday, I'm a judge in the Superior Court. I'll never forget it. Started out, and we were the old traditional court. You had the municipal court. You had the superior court. You had a presiding judge. You had a criminal department. And then, because Ventura was so small, you had extra duties with probate might be your job. Juvenile court was, I think they had 2 days a week for juvenile delinquency and 1 or 2 days for juvenile dependency. It is nothing like today.
Yeah. Now, I know you tried a variety of cases, and I know that because at that time
you were reversing.
I was reviewing your cases, and this is a little private joke between us. You used to articulate, which I think many of the lawyers enjoyed, your reasoning. You go back and forth and consider. And I wound up at our, I'm going to confess this now, you and I both know it. I used to imitate you at our conferences when we'd be reading the transcript on your appeals. On the one hand, you were like a rabbi. On the one hand, we have this, but on the other hand, and he makes a good argument, you go back and forth, summarize everybody's opinions, and then come up with your decision. And I said, he's already a Court of Appeal justice.
Well, I felt a duty to do that.
Yes, I understand. I think that was very admirable. Not only was it extremely helpful to the lawyers who appreciated it, but to the Court of Appeal. You let people know what your reasoning process was.
I felt the most important thing for me was win, lose, or draw, the parties had a right to know that somebody was listening, their attorney did their job, and that the judge actually thought about it and could tell them why they got the result they got. I'd been in courts where the judges were peremptory. There's been a change in the entire judiciary from that day, and that was a transitional time.
Yeah.
And today it is a much more user-friendly environment.
Yes. And you started the user-friendly approach because it was people, and you made people feel you could tell from reading the transcript that it was important to you to make litigants and the attorneys feel welcome. You were talked to them as not some god on high, but as a person with a job who had to make a decision.
I'm reminded of one of the first sessions we had in our court.
When you say our court, you mean the Court of Appeal?
Court of Appeal. When I had joined you, Steve Stone had stepped down and created the vacancy, and I was appointed into it. And it was you, me, Coffey, and Kenny Yeagan.
Justice Paul Coffey.
Paul Coffey.
Who's retired now.
He is. And Ken is still sitting.
Yes.
And we are the 3 senior ranking in terms of service justices in the 2nd District, 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, probably in the state almost.
we're up there.
Yeah.
And we're sitting in our courtroom, and I'd asked a question. I'll never forget you did this. And I asked a question of a lawyer, and I did it. Well, on the one hand, you were preparing, and you spontaneously said, "I know it.
Oh,
I know it."
I know.
It was pretty funny.
So, well, I want to back up a little bit on the Superior Court.
Yeah.
You had a number of passions. I just want to touch on briefly, then we'll get to the Court of Appeal. You were the Determinate Sentencing Law.
Right.
Was passed, a very, very complicated set of laws that rivaled the Internal Revenue Code and trying to figure. And you became really one of the state's experts on it. You knew this very arcane sentencing procedure with such, and you explained it with such clarity. It was really quite remarkable. I want to talk a little, and I also want to talk about your passion for juvenile justice.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about the Determinate Sentencing Law and how could how did you get an interest in that?
Well, I love criminal law, and as a trial judge, I'd come out of an active criminal practice because the last law firm I worked with was a workers' compensation firm, and I represented workers who were in need of representation in criminal courts, and also we would do third-party tort actions. And I just love the criminal law. I can't explain it any other way. So when I got into the court, we had our orientation. We had Judges College, and our speaker on sentencing, now the Determinate Sentencing Law had passed in 1978, had passed in 76, was effective in 78. And it fascinated me. I can't explain it, you know, just did. And I learned it. And I had good teachers in Judges. There were two teachers who shall remain anonymous who taught it by saying, you can't understand this.
You cannot understand.
You cannot understand this, addressing the entirety of the audience.
Right.
But I'll explain it to you. We'll explain it to you. And you call us if you have a problem. That didn't seem to me to be a very positive approach on how to teach anything. So I went to Norm Epstein, who was the dean of the Judges College, and I said, you know, this
and
is
one of our very revered justices. He just recently retired.
Well said, and well deserved. And I said, you know, these guys taught this course, and it was just awful, because they basically taught us with the premise that we couldn't understand it. And it was wish fulfillment, because by the time they were through teaching it, nobody could understand it. Anyway, so I ended up going into new judge orientation. These two guys ceased teaching criminal sentencing. And I taught sentencing for over 10 years at the Judges College. Bob Thomas taught it with me, and wonderful judge from Northern California. Her name escapes me at the moment, but we taught determinate sentencing for over a decade. And so I became very intimately familiar with it, loved it, and taught it to DAs, I taught it to PDs, I taught it any chance I got.
PDs are public
defenders. Yeah. And when I got to our court, I wrote I had been involved with a program at Stanford University, which was a sentencing project, the idea being that it's very, for the viewer, the law of California was extremely punitive from 1978 until roughly 2000. Sentences were extremely long, probation was prohibited in many cases, and the legislature was only concerned with adding ways to make sentences longer. The prison population quadrupled. It was a time of law and order, and anybody who thought or suggested they weren't in favor of something that increased the punishment for a crime, whether as an enhancement to the crime or as a substantive crime itself, would be dinged. It was a conservative state. We had two conservative or moderate governors for a 16-year period. And sentencing was brutal. Judges were doing the best they could. The tool they had a problem that required a scalpel, and the tools they were given were axes and saws. And a lot of judges worked very hard most judges worked very hard to make scalpels out of those instruments. The tenor of the law changed. And I was involved in this Stanford project because they knew that you could never change the law to make a sentence less. And in fact, I was with a group that was headed up by Bill Lockyer, who became the Attorney General of California. He was a state senator at the time. And we put together an entire new sentencing law. SB 1, I think, was the number. It passed both houses of the legislature, and the governor vetoed it. And the stated reason was it was too lenient on parolees in the governor's message of rejection. So that died. It really was a very, I thought, a reasonable approach to organizing what is a very disorganized code, and remains so. In Stanford, a professor up there had gathered together a working group of all over the state from all disciplines affected by the criminal justice system: judges, lawyers, DAs, PD, public defenders, sociologists, probation officers, you name it. They were police officers. And the idea was to develop a sentencing commission which had been done in Minnesota and in North Carolina. Understanding that the legislature often would not want to mess with sentences. The idea was that a commission would review sentences, policies, and such, and make a recommendation to the legislature, which, if not opposed, would pass. Or if opposed, they would vote on it and say, well, that was a recommendation. That's what they did in Minnesota. That's what they did in the Carolinas. And we tried to get that through in California, and it just never really got any traction.
But at least now we have something going.
We got a lot of going now.
Yeah. But I mean, you were at the forefront of sort of getting some
I was in the
changes.
group. Yeah.
Okay. Let me move along if we can.
Right.
I just wanted to briefly touch on juvenile justice. In fact, you spearheaded so many innovations on the Superior Court. In juvenile, you're a state expert on it. You've lectured on it. You've won awards for it. And in fact, you have an entire complex named after you in Ventura, Perren Center, I think it's called. And you're still alive and you have a building named after you. That doesn't happen very often. So just give us because I want to move on to the Court of Appeal. But you made such an impact in juvenile court. I think
that was an accident also.
Well,
what happened
a lucky
was,
accident for everyone.
It was for me, yeah. I was the presiding judge of the court, and I had a juvenile court judge who didn't seem to have much time in which he was engaged in being a juvenile court judge. So I decided I'd transfer myself out of the master calendar department, which is what historically the presiding judge had sat in. We had a very experienced civil litigator who had just been appointed, Richard Aldrich, to our court, who's now a retired justice of the Court of Appeal. And I said, look, this guy gets it. Let him do that. And I'll do juvenile court because it doesn't consume a full day every day, and I'll give me time to do my administrative duties more effectively. Boy, was I wrong. Juvenile court, how much time do you want to spend on it? As much as you want. And I wanted a lot. So ultimately what became a job of convenience became a passion, if not an obsession. And I served for 3 years there initially and transferred out at my request because I just needed to get out of there for a while. And I loved it. 2 years later, I went back and did 2 more years in juvenile court. I felt it was the place where you could really make a difference in somebody's life. That's arrogant to think, that, I suppose, as a judge, well, I can make a difference. Well, we all think we can make a difference, and we do. But I had the difference right in front of me. These are kids who had to resist gangs. When a mother stands up in the audience and says, Judge, would you please just order him to this town in Mexico, which our family is from. It's too tough up here for him. The gang infestations, particularly in Oxnard, were corrosive. You would make orders telling kids to get out of gangs. When a kid looks at you and says, Judge, I really would like to. I can't. And what the kid said was, I got 2 choices. I can be in a gang and at least I have allies. If I get out of the gang, now all the other gangs which hated me when I was in the gang still hate me. But now the gang hates me too. I have no refuge. So we had to work on that, with those paints on that canvas. And we worked with probation officers. We had a juvenile justice group out of the county that worked together. But the things that would happen in juvenile court, the one that always comes to my mind was a kid named David. He was 14 years old, and he was a stone-cold alcoholic. And his mother was desperate. She was sitting in court saying, help me. So I said, well, he's been picked up for public intoxication, and he's on violation of probation, so I'm just going to say, I'll give him 90 days in juvenile hall to dry out. I paused. Or, David, I'll give you a choice. you can go to AA every day for 90 days. And I won't send you into the hall. We'll keep you on probation with no other consequence. I'd made that offer to others before, and they turned it down. David said, sure. About 80 days later, he's in my court. My heart just sank. He's there, his lawyer's there. And then I took notice of the fact he wasn't on calendar. So his lawyer says, well, yeah, Honor, he's not on calendar. So, well, you know, great to see you, David. I hope everything's okay. But, well, Judge, he's getting his 90-day chip at AA. Could you please come to his AA meeting when he gets his 90-day chip? It was in Santa Paula at night. Sure. You know, sitting at a table in AA with that kid sitting next to me, succeeding in his recovery with the assistance of a community of Alcoholics Anonymous. As I go around the table, hi, I'm Joe, I'm the president, you're alcoholic president. I'm Fred, I'm Nancy, whatever, I'm alcoholic, which is true, that you know that from what they say of AA. What comes to me? I don't drink hard liquor. I mean, I like wine, I like beer, but I'm certainly not an alcoholic. So what do I say? So I said, well, I'm here for David. And they were saying, hi, Steve. You know, I didn't say who I was, why. I just said I was there for that reason. And David introduces himself. I'm David. I'm an alcoholic. No, David was the kid. He was their child. And his mother was his lawyer, who, when it came her turn to introduce, said, hi, I'm his lawyer and I'm an alcoholic. Yeah, exactly. My eyes bugged out, too. I had no clue. The vibrancy of that moment will live with me forever. Parents coming up to me on the street saying, thank you for locking a kid up. Now, I'm sure there is a like number of them that have a dartboard at their home that they're throwing at a portrait of me. But I loved it in there. And the attorneys worked together. It was enriching every day. It was tough every day. We would cry every day. It was just a concerted collegial effort to try and improve the quality of life for people.
Terrific. I just want to get to the Court of Appeal as well. We could talk for the next couple of weeks here because we're
going to.
It looks like it, and because you have such rich stories and they're so compelling. But you came up with an idea, did you not, of having all the facilities that are necessary for juvenile justice in one place?
Yes.
So, for example, they don't have to go across town to the probation department, then come to court for one thing, and so on. There's a whole complex
yes.
that that's been put together in your name. Could you just tell us briefly how that
what happened? I got a call from the probation office and said, we need you to go up to Sacramento with us. There is $120 million of a pot they're going to distribute. All the counties are applying for it for services. It's a one-time federal grant. Can you make the pitch for us for juvenile court? I said, sure, what do you want? He said, we want $42 million. I said, that's a third of the pot. Yeah. You're not going to get that.
Yeah.
He said, well, if we can't get that, we can't get anything because we can't do anything with less. Okay, so we go up to Sacramento. We're in a motel that is as run down as anything you have ever seen, and corrections people from all over the state are the board. And I was given, our chief probation officer made his pitch, and then I made the close. And I gave a 10-minute, they said, you have just 10 minutes. I said, it'll be the most important 10 minutes of my life. And I made a pitch. It was effective. And 40 some odd counties had applied for money, and we got a third of it. And that was the consequence of how we went over that. It was the Juvenile Justice Facility. And as I was coming to the Court of Appeal, I was contacted by our executive officer, Sheila Gonzalez, who said, they want to name the facility after you. I said, I don't want that. And Sheila had a way. And she says, well, let me tell you who it's going to get named after if you turn this down. It was going to be named after a supervisor who opposed its construction. I said, I can't have that happen. She says, your call.
She knew how to do it.
She knew how to do it.
And in fact, I recall being at that ceremony when they spoke about you, and I'm still moved by your acceptance and the feeling that was your voice cracked about being in your family's name, your father. You mentioned that. It was really quite moving. So, and you have this joke you tell us all the time. You said, I can see these kids saying, yeah, I'm getting sent to Perren. So, but anyway, it's really a great source of pride in the community, and it's really made a major difference. And that has to be one of the most enriching experiences I can imagine anyone can have. So you've really made quite a difference. So now I want to move to the Court of Appeal. We could talk for the next few weeks about your life and all the things you've done, because you've made such an impression on so many people. And we joke about you being the mayor of Ventura. I can't go to lunch with you. No one can, because everybody's coming up to the table and saying, hi, I did this, remember you did this for me, and so on. We walk down the street, you know everything about Ventura. Everybody knows you've been really a dynamic and very important influence in the community and in the state as well. So tell me about the Court of Appeal. Now, I recall you came and sat with us by assignment when you were on the Superior Court.
True.
And you were there, and I recall you saying to me, my God, this is the last place in the world I want to wind up.
That's true.
Just tell us briefly about your quick sojourn with us.
I was assigned, when Rose Bird was the chief, she wanted to have the Superior Court judges, it was a great idea, come up and do short-term courtships, if you will. We got 2 months, and I was designated, and I've never been one who liked writing, and I love the activity, the human interaction in a trial court. So I came up to the Court of Appeal. I sat for 2 months. I walked in a case. You handed me a case. It occupied 4 shelves, and I wrote it with no help. Greatest class I ever had, because I had you and Richard Abbey and Steve Stone critiquing it when I presented it for a conference that we have every Tuesday. And you ripped me apart, which it was just a wonderful experience. My digression will be brief here. You are the finest judge I've ever known. You're the best writer I've ever known, and I have learned every day from you. And you instilled in me a notion, maybe there's something in this. So, and you helped me get on the Court of Appeal. I know that. And when I was appointed, I walked into your chambers and we chatted. And it was just very direct. He said, look, this is what we do. Figure out what the case is about. The most difficult paragraph you'll write is your first paragraph, setting forth the facts in a coherent way. Be direct and clear, and be brief. I remember it. I thought, how am I going to do this? I don't know. I'm still not confident in my writing at this point. And
I'll have to file a dissent to that. Well, but anyway, go on. Thank you. But
so now I'm on the court with you and with Ken, who has a history, Ken Yegan, of been on the court forever as a research attorney, was a trial judge, as a colleague of mine on the Superior Court, and then came to the Court of Appeal in 1991. And Ken and I are politically and philosophically quite different. And then Paul Coffey was on the court, who I had practiced against as a private practitioner. It's hard to... I cannot explain, nor will I ever be able to explain, the power of that collective group and its dynamic and its dedication to the cause of justice. That sounds pious crap, I suppose. But if you could be in our conferences when we review the cases and we literally tear them apart for their grammar, for their organization, for their length, and for their substance. It is every month a celebration of American jurisprudence and the dedication of decent people to a lawful society. These are hard times we're in, and I believe firmly that the courts are the justice's last stand. And I guess the Castle Keep, I learned when I was over in England last summer, is the last place that the warriors would go into to make their last stand when the castle was under siege. And I think that's where the courts are. So anyway, we have these get-togethers, and it's a shame they're confidential, because I think the public would be overjoyed at knowing how people really care. And it's not just us. I think all the courts do this.
There's just different styles.
Very much so.
One thing we do in our court, and you've mentioned it to me, and is that we, a judge who might be in the majority, will help the judge write a better dissent who disagrees with that judge, because we're interested in getting the product out there that really carefully analyzes all the issues from different sides.
There is collegiality is the wrong word. There is a symbiosis of collective intellects, such as they may be, who will not settle for, okay, just pass the next bonbon like in a Lucy on the conveyor belt. There's a human being involved, or party's got a problem. This is real stuff that has a direct impact, and we're telling a judge he or she got it right or wrong. The jury got it right or wrong. We understand the restraints that are put upon us by the rules of the review. And I have sat with you in, 20 times 12, 240 hearings or more. And not one goes by that you don't look at a lawyer, and I know where your feelings are, and say, yes, counsel, that's fine, but what's our standard of review? We're not retrying your case here. And I find myself, every time I look at a case, that's my gold standard. And this is where you and I have this philosophical battle about Richard Posner and the professor up at Hastings, who
Richard Posner is very well-known appellate justice federal court who recently retired, was one of the founders of the Economic School of Jurisprudence, started out as a kind of social utility approach to law, and then became, in his final days, quite liberal and quite compassionate about pro-per and so on. Very interesting, a true intellectual who had written essays about T.S. Eliot and literature, and one writer for the New Yorker said he publishes a book every 20 minutes. So, and he made a comment that really bothered you.
Really bothered me.
Yeah.
He said, in essence, and I'll refer to this professor at Hastings the same, Posner's comment was, in essence, look, you look at a case and you figure out what the result ought to be. And you can always find a way, or a statute, or a case that'll support you, and you can write it. And that just hit me completely wrong.
Well, I'm just going to interrupt you for a second. You and I had a debate, and we won't have the debate here.
Right.
But I think what he's talking about is finding a principled way to do it. Because, and I don't think he means you just make up stuff and do whatever you want. I think he's certainly appreciates the precedent and what the law is about and gradualism and so on. But I understand that it sounds like hey, a judge just running amok, and that bothers you.
Well, it wasn't quite that. It was, he as much as said that I get what I want. Not so much amok, a man who was in his amuckness
I got it.
was surrounded. Okay. The judge, the professor at Hastings, and I apologize for not remembering her name, had an even more unpleasant view. She says, basically, the courts of appeal are cowards who hide behind standards of review. If they can't, they want to reach a decision, they say, yeah, maybe that's what the trial court did, maybe it was right or wrong, but was within the discretion of the court, and we're not going to turn it over. And she says, that's baloney.
Yeah, she thinks we're affirming too often.
We're affirming too often, we're deferential to the standards. We don't go for real justice.
Yeah.
We can get in a philosophical battle over what real justice is all day long.
But anyway, let me ask you just a few more things about
Sure.
And I just want to ask you about some cases you've written. You're quite active in oral argument.
Coming from you, that's...
Well, I think, no, I mean, there are some people, some of our colleagues, there's a view that oral argument is a waste of time, that we've really decided the case ahead of time. We've read all the briefs we've written under memorandum, and even though the Constitution provides for the right to oral argument, we're going through the motion. Some people think that, others don't. You and I have a different view about that. What's your view?
My view is 95% of the time we're going to pretty much have the case decided going in, but something may be askew. If I knew what was going to be askew, I would say oral argument isn't the big deal, but it is. We're mandated to have oral argument. You control it beautifully. And I'd add pro pers. You give deference to people who are in great distress, very unhappy, and you treat them with respect. And the whole process is one, I hope, of respect. I think it is true of me, and you, and Ken, and Marty. Martin Tangeman. And I came in rough-hewn, and I was taken aside and said, Steve, do you know what you're doing? You're arguing. Your job isn't to argue. You're in control. What the heck are you arguing about? And it was a revelation to me, because I really didn't even think I was doing that. The attorney's not in a fight with me. I got the power. And you made that clear to me. We're here to learn, and as you so eloquently say, you are our teachers. We aren't masters of everything. You are going to help us with your briefs and with your presentation. Now teach us. And then your most famous phrase to the lawyer who's really got a strong and powerful presentation in the interests of justice and his client. There's silence after the lawyer has made that presentation, and you look at them and you say, well, that's all well and good, but how do I write it? And that shows a respect for him or her, and it shows a respect for the principles that you continually espouse. We're not runaways. We're not liberals or conservatives. I side with you, I side with Ken. Most of our cases are unanimous opinions, but we have cases, Brillage being a classic, and that's a good example.
Okay, Brillage was the case. We'll talk about it, and then we'll wrap this up.
Sure. You sum it up because you beat the heck out of me.
No, I didn't. I see your point. We've had differences on some cases, but all courts do. Well, why don't you just tell us some of the significant cases that mean a great deal to you? You've written dozens of cases. You're the expert on determinate sentencing.
Well, Neely is...
and we certainly look to you. We're always coming to you. Can you figure this thing out? It's crazy, some of the determinate sentencing law. And you have, I recall a case where you came up with an analysis that I said, well, that's impossible. And then the more I looked at it, this was case with about a drug rehabilitation program. And I said, oh my God, you're absolutely right. I was going to dissent. And in fact, I said, you're right. And you turned me around. Supreme Court denied review. It was an excellent, brilliant opinion about the
it was an oddball case.
It was a very oddball case, and your analysis of it, I don't want to go through all the facts here now, but it was stunning to me, your analysis and how right you were and how you completely turned me around. Was there a dissent in that case?
Yeah,
I forgot.
Ken.
That's right. Justice Yagan dissented. And I said, he's right. We tried to have this. He says, but it can't. I says, it is. It's correct. And I tried to argue, you know, we do our best. And that case, what you just have to tell us briefly if you can recall.
Well, it just had to do with a statute. There's a whole series of statutes that have been passed by initiative and some by straight legislation. In these complex, if you fail this, you get that. You're going to have it's a boutique sentencing, if you will. They will have felonies can be sentenced as misdemeanors now, but the sentence is a misdemeanor sentence. But it's a time you're getting a felony time, but you do it locally. Yeah. And they have what are called split sentences. Right. And anyway, and this guy had violated
3 times.
He'd violated a lot.
Yeah.
And the judge made the declaration, I cannot deal with you anymore. You are not responsive to the situation. I'm sentencing you now to the term prescribed for your crime, which would have been months or a year or whatever. And I said, you can't do it. The statute said if there's a declaration the person is not capable of conforming or being rehabilitated, the maximum time you could put him in custody was 30 days. And
that's what the statute said. This wasn't a crime against humanity, against people. This was a crime of being under the influence and not being able to control it.
Right.
And there was a recognition that this person needs help. Putting them in jail does nothing. They're not menacing society. They're menacing themselves. Maybe it has an adverse effect on society. But there's another case you're quite proud of.
People versus Neely was the most cited case I've written in the criminal law, and it had to do with analysis of stacking a determinate sentence with an indeterminate sentence and how you compute that. And without going into any details, I wrote an essay, and often saying I wrote, we know our attorneys do a lot of the heavy lifting. This one I wrote, by and large, and I detail the analysis of how you do a sentencing process with determinate sentencing, indeterminate sentencing, and the various terms that we use in the law, because people were very loosey-goosey with that terminology, and I wrote that.
This is cited all over the state. Everyone cites that case.
It's a leading case on that.
It is Perren on determinate sentencing.
It was, and I loved it.
It still is.
And it's still there.
And you know, you've won so many awards. I mean, we could go on and on about those. You've given lectures to attorneys, criminal law attorneys. You've been recognized as a Judge of the Year by the Ventura Bar, other bar associations as well. You have made a major significant contribution to the development of the law in California. You're a force, and a force of, and a humanitarian, a person that is warm and gives people in the court a feeling that they're getting real justice. That has to be a good feeling.
It's a good feeling to come to work every day. It's a good feeling to be able to have something in hand that is like, you know, building a house. It's there. It's a product. And if you're wrong, you're told you're wrong. The Supreme Court slapped me down, as it has all of us. But you and I both could have retired ages ago. I could have retired in 2001. 2002, rather. You could have retired an eternity ago.
20 years or something, 21. We just can't leave, can we?
We can't. Yes. And it's something we roll around all the time. Yeah. I guess let's harken back to what you said about you didn't really enjoy it very much when you were there in 1988, sitting on the Court of Appeal. What happened? I grew up is what happened. After I'd been exposed to the law in so many ways, and frankly after some pretty rugged trials, including death penalty cases, which are at their best, horrible.
I think what keeps you young is you're open to learning all the time.
We have
you
to
don't
be.
have it all. There's a humility. You're always willing to learn and to change. And sometimes I consider you even too self-effacing. But it's genuine, because you just want to know, you want to get better all the time. And I think that's a very important quality on people that excel.
And thank you. And if not us, who? Is a biblical phrase. And we adhere to the rule of law because we are passionate about the order and structure of our society. And we are pained when we see that in peril, as it is today. That's my political comment. But we sit across the table from each other. We embrace the law and embrace each other for only one purpose, and that's to achieve a just and fair result in the case and for a society that can believe in us, because the only weapon we have no army, we have no police force. The only thing we have is our integrity and the respect of the public. And if we ever lose that, we are utterly valueless to the society.
You know, just in closing, and I want to give you the last word, obviously, but you mentioned this Berlage case. It was an arbitration case.
It's wonderful.
Where we were on opposite ends of that case. And of course, I reread it in preparation for today and read your dissent. Boy, it's damn good. I wonder if I changed my mind. It was really quite excellent. It was a case where there was almost no really great answer to come up with, and it brought back some great memories. So you made some other remarks. What are your final closing remarks?
Well, hopefully they're not final, but
yeah, I mean for this, not final, but for this interview.
I mentor a lot of kids in the law. I work with young people in a variety of capacities. And Ron George,
who was the Chief
Justice of California when I was appointed, he made it very clear that it is the duty of the judge to be a part of the community. We are not above anything. And the court changed in that way. You look at it today, they're in clubs, they're in groups, they're out in the field. They are not disassociated above or beside society. And I think that has been a very, very good thing. It's a dangerous area because it exposes us to some criticism. And the rules and canons by which we must conduct our business limit what we can do. But to the extent that we can be a part of and visible to the community, so that not some faceless, black-robed charlatan is deciding these cases, but a real human being who cares, gives us the credibility that will mean for the future. We don't need that army. We don't need that police force. We don't need any weapons other than our integrity and our intellect. And people like you and the kind of work that I think we do.
Thank you, Steve. It's been fun spending the last, how many hours have we spent?
So this last week and a half.
Okay.
Thank you, Arthur.
Thank you.